We used to look up at the top of the hill and feel terrified. There were so many bullets whizzing by, right past our heads. Everyone was crawling and trying to hide behind the tree trunks that the Germans had cut down while climbing the hill. The dear Lordness wouldn't stop. It was just rat-tat-tat-tat-tat. Every now and then, someone would scream from getting hit. The sergeants and officers pushed the troops forward. Advance, damn it. Advance. Don't retreat. And they themselves crawled forward like madmen, shooting and taking cover at the same time. We were getting shot at from above as we climbed up. And it was freezing cold. It took a lot of courage. Or a lot of madness. I still don't know. During the narrative, his breathing would become labored, and his wrinkled face would turn into a mask of stone. We loved hearing my grandfather's stories about World War II. Old Manuel would tell us the same story, always with the same excitement. The capture of Monte Castelo. And at 5 years old, I didn't understand much, except that he was fighting with his friends in the war, like I saw in the movies. My older brother, already 13, would explain that dear Lurdna wasn't an evil woman shooting at our grandfather, but a gun that had been nicknamed that. Grandpa Manuel was very proud of that part of his life. One thing he was very proud of was being personally praised by General Cordero de Farias, who, at the end of the battle, firmly grabbed his shoulder and said, "Always remember this, my boy. Carry this terrible yet glorious moment in your heart for the rest of your life. You were an intrepid and brave warrior. Now it's time to go home." Intrepid. What the hell is that? These educated folks praise us with words that sound like insults. To find out the meaning, he asked the group's doctor. Intrepid, Corporal Manuel, means a very brave, very courageous man. Whenever he could, Grandpa would use this word that had impressed his rough countryman's ear. So, it was no surprise that when we got a puppy, Grandpa Manuel named him Intrepid. The little furball ran around the house, biting our heels with those sharp puppy teeth that felt like needles. My mother was exasperated with the little shark biting our feet while she worked in the kitchen. I couldn't pronounce the name given to the dog, but he responded every time I called him. He perfectly understood my childish calls. Intrepid became my great friend for backyard games and running around the street. We fought between the mango trees in the yard, mimicking episodes of the Barbarian Warriors, but the canine monster was showing signs that he would win all future battles given his growing size and weight. We ran a lot during our fights among the trees. Sometimes we knocked over the tobacco rolls that Grandpa Manuel had carefully prepared for his cigarettes. His severe black eyes would narrow, and the scolding that followed was like a thunderstorm, such was the old man's fury. After all, it was the same mistake happening repeatedly. When the dog knocked over the tobacco, Grandpa would grab any piece of wood or branch nearby and hit the poor creature. But Intrepid took the blows well, as we later discovered he was a mix of mutt and German shepherd. That explained the animal's large build. In our early street races, neighbors would often panic, thinking the giant dog was chasing me to bite me. Over time, they understood it was just a game with the family dog. The other children in the street joined us in the fun. However, the dog's fondness for chasing chickens caused some problems. He would enter neighboring yards and occasionally kill a bird. Besides paying for the chickens, we had to face the owner's fury. During one of these invasions, Intrepid entered old Veridiana's yard. The children's running stopped immediately. We watched, petrified, as the dog advanced toward the cursed yard. I think we all hoped he would turn back halfway. But that hope vanished when the dog jumped the fence and disappeared behind it. Veridiana's house was a forbidden place for all of us. No child dared even to stand in front of it. Even some adults avoided the place. When it was unavoidable to pass by, they did so quickly and fearfully. The old woman had a reputation for being a witch. My grandfather vehemently rejected this neighborhood belief. He said it was nonsense from backward people because those things don't exist. However, our childish minds weren't easily convinced. Moreover, Veridiana's rare appearances at her window only added to the rumor. Her hair was long, white, and disheveled, framing a wrinkled and bony face. Her very green and lively eyes gave her a mad look. and her toothless mouth, which seemed always to be smiling, completed a vision so repulsive that it was impossible for us children to see her without running away terrified. Old residents said Veridiana discovered her husband, Antonio, was cheating on her and went to his workplace to confront him. When she arrived, they had a fierce argument, and her husband humiliated her mercilessly in front of everyone. They say Veridiana came home covering her face with a headscarf but was clearly sobbing. Strong sobs that shook her body. She broke everything inside the house, crying and screaming. The clamor of her despair caught the attention of passers-by. Neighbors noticed she had locked herself in with her son and set the house on fire. Grandpa Manuel was one of those who broke down the door to save them. Her son, Elio, also abandoned her after that bout of madness, going to live with his father. Veridiana never recovered. That's when stories about her becoming a witch began. The desire for revenge had taken over her so obsessively that she finally made a pact with the devil. Paralyzed in the street, we heard the sound of things breaking as Intrepid ran through the old woman's yard. When Veridiana finally reacted, we heard her shrill voice hurling curses. "Damned mutt! I'll kill you, you bastard! I'll make soup with your head!" The dog jumped back over the fence into the street with the same clumsy energy with which he had jumped in. The old woman appeared, throwing stones and junk at the dog like a distorted metal mug that landed near my feet. Seeing us, she smiled mockingly, showing her toothless gums. She tilted her head toward her shoulder and stared at us intently. Her eyes seemed to spark in the deep hollows that were her eye sockets. The grimace on her still face, like a parody of a smile, reminded me of the Greek theater masks I had seen in one of my mother's books. "Do you want some candy, children?" she said, in a suddenly sweetened voice. We ran home in a hurry, full of fear of that sinister figure. To us, there was no doubt the old woman was a witch. I ran inside, telling my mother and grandfather what had happened. "Mom, Grandpa, the witch said she's going to make soup with our dog and tried to give us bewitched candy." Naturally, the adults laughed and warned me not to disturb the poor, unhappy woman. "Don't talk nonsense, boy," said Grandpa. "Stop the foolishness. I don't want to hear those stories here again. Leave the poor creature alone. I'll talk to the other kids' parents to correct their foolish kids." Mom echoed her father. "If you come up with those silly stories again, you'll be grounded and won't play outside. And I'll give your flea-bitten friend to someone far away. You'll see," she concluded, wagging her finger. The last threat was the scariest. Even my brother, who had been hiding behind Mom and Grandpa, mocking me while I got scolded, stopped laughing when he heard we might lose our beloved flea-bitten friend. That night, I had a horrible nightmare. I dreamed I was in my bed, seeing everything around as if I were awake, and suddenly a white smoke, like the mist I saw on cold festival nights, invaded our room. The room where we all slept together. The mist thickened near Grandpa Manuel's face and pulled another mist out of him until he was dry and motionless, with his dead face turned toward me, staring. I tried to scream, but no sound came from my throat. After killing my grandfather, the mist slid over to my mother and then to my brother, sucking the life out of them and leaving them with dead, dried-up faces turned toward me. Then, the mist began to gather beside me and took the form of a person, Veridiana. She looked firmly into my eyes, with the same scary face we had seen in the afternoon, and began to bring her toothless mouth closer to my face, hissing like a snake. I ran to hide in the makeshift wooden bathroom in our backyard. At this point in the dream, I woke up with my heart pounding and my body covered in sweat. In the morning, I told no one about my nightmare. After that incident with the dog and the children, Veridiana became a topic of neighborhood conversations again. A group of my mother's friends, who always gather at our house to do their nails, dye their hair, and gossip about others, naturally followed the trend of the moment, talking about the scary and bitter old woman's life. In the midst of so much information, one of the women, Mrs. Dora, remembered an important fact. "Holy Mary! Did you know that Elio turns 18 this August?" she asked, widening her eyes and leaving her mouth open at the end of the sentence to show surprise. "But he's been living with Antonio for a long time. The heartless man completely abandoned his mother. He never came back here," said my mother. But Mrs. Grasinia, she tried to kill herself and the boy. She tried to set the house on fire and kill him, said another woman, a chubby one with a reddened face. My mother made a gesture of partial agreement, raising her eyebrows and nodding her head. But I see Antonio almost every time I go to the market across the bridge, my mother said. He pretends he doesn't see us, she added. The first full moon night of that August left a trail of blood and shock among the residents. Antonio and his wife were found butchered in the house where they lived, on the other side of the bridge. The neighbors said there were pieces of them scattered in all the rooms. They said there were deep cuts in all the pieces, but the trunks were the most mutilated parts. I listened to the adults' conversations until they realized a child was present and shooed me away. I sneaked closer to some groups of adults discussing the murder. I listened to their conversations as much as I could before they chased me away. No one knew what happened to Elio. All they knew, including the police who were at the scene, was that the young man was not dead in that house. He could be alive somewhere else, where he might have been taken to be killed elsewhere. No one considered the possibility that the young man was the murderer. The bodies must have been dismembered by someone very strong and equipped with crude cutting tools. My mother suggested the possibility that a jaguar had attacked the couple, but no jaguar had ever been seen there. Veridiana's house displayed a liveliness never seen before. The old woman's voice was heard singing and even laughing. She was even seen at the window trying to smile at passersby. But her joy was short-lived. The old woman was the next victim of the full moon beast. The creature that killed her husband and his new wife was still at large. As usual, people rushed to the poor woman's house to see what had happened. And the children went along. That's how I got to see several broken parts of the house. And I saw the most astonishing thing, an image that remains vivid in my memory to this day, Veridiana's severed head. The head was lying at the door, inverted with the neck cut facing up. The same scary expression was on her dead face. The same grimace, as if smiling at the moment the head was severed. The pool of blood around it. It all formed an image worse than any of my nightmares. Grandpa Manuel, using his prerogative as a longtime resident and a brave man, ignored the need to wait for the police and entered the house. He passed by the fallen head at the door without showing any emotion. He must have seen many similar scenes in the war. If my grandfather entered the house firmly and defiantly, something drastically changed in his demeanor when he exited. He came out hurriedly and pale. He tried to disguise his fear and nervousness with a raised voice and simulated irritation. In his right hand, he carried a small book. Most of the residents present were not very literate and did not give importance to this detail. Grandpa took me by the arm and led me home. However, on the way out, he told everyone there, "Go home and don't leave. Don't go out at night until the full moon passes." I know many didn't understand, but they obeyed. Grandpa was very respected in the village. That night, everyone was kept indoors, including the dog, because of a danger neither my brother nor I understood. Only my grandfather and my mother knew. I was sure the village streets were empty because of my grandfather's words. The mix of fear of death and obedience to the wise old man would empty the streets. The full moon would shine in vain, with no one to admire it. But as the saying goes, in a blacksmith's house, the skewer is wood. It was precisely in my grandfather's house that someone disobeyed his order. Me. At some late hour of the night, I woke up with an immense need to urinate. The house was silent, as everyone slept. Even the dog lay still, curled up near my bed. He slept like all the other occupants of that room. I opened the door as usual and headed to the bathroom in the backyard. Groggy from sleep, I didn't remember the warnings or the dangers. I walked a few meters towards the bathroom. That's when I saw something that froze my blood and made me recall all the horrors of the past days. A shadow moved among the mango trees. Hidden in the darkness under the tree canopy, the shadow watched me. Shining eyes, like those of a cat, moved forward. I could then see the horrifying figure in all its terrifying fullness. It was like a man covered in fur. He had the head of a dog with a cruel expression in his red eyes. I felt urine trickling down my legs. The monster growled low and walked towards me. As in the nightmare, I tried to scream but couldn't. Suddenly, with great effort, I managed to scream for help. Teppy. My big flea-bitten friend burst through the open door, running and growling. Furiously, he charged at the monstrous figure threatening me. Teppy, which was how I could pronounce our dog's name, grappled with the monster so fiercely that their ferocity blended, as did their forms. Blood splattered without me knowing which of the two was bleeding with each gush that stained the ground. Awoken by the noise of the fight between the dog and the monster, Grandpa Manuel came out with his shotgun. He stood beside me and tried to aim at the intruder, but couldn't. Finally, Intrepid destroyed the monster's throat with his teeth. Soon, both lay motionless on the ground. Intrepid was severely injured, his torso torn open and bleeding heavily. He looked at us one last time and passed away with a whimper. I cried. The monster died, revealing a man. Elio, the witch's son. Today, at 50 years old, I still keep the book my grandfather took from Veridiana's house. In it, the old woman narrated how she enchanted her hated son who had abandoned her, turning him into a weapon of revenge against Antonio, the husband who had humiliated and despised her. Elio had become a werewolf by his rejected mother's spell. Veridiana's revenge was to see Antonio's new family killed by one of its members. I never knew what to do with that book. It remains with me as a warning against the world's horrors. My wife and son have gotten used to the care I have for an old black and white photo in which I appear as a boy standing next to a huge mutt. My great friend Teppy. My savior.